Shabbat Shalom. As I had to learn in ninth grade, but can only remember the first line of it, laugh and the world laughs with you, weep and you weep alone. For the saddled earth must borrow its mirth, but has trouble enough of its own. A very somber and depressing poem, I remember quite distinctly, although, like I said, I can't recite the rest of it without double checking. But Judaism says, no, that's not the way it's supposed to work. I mean, yes, we laugh together. We just had the holiday of Purim, obviously. But when somebody is weeping, we don't let them weep alone. We rush to their aid. We want to come and provide consolation, support. It's just a pity that we are all so rubbish at it, that we're all terrible at actually providing what a person needs. We know we want to. We can feel that urge within us. But most of us, well, we can be a little clumsy at best. And in case you think I'm just, looking down from the pulpit, the rabbi, no. Rabbis are just about as terrible as everyone else, and sometimes even worse, because sometimes they outthink themselves when trying to help. Which leads us back to the Talmud, Masechet Brachot, one of the most beautiful, amazing, and face-palming sections of the entire Masechet. Rabbi Yochanan hears that his student, Rabbi Elazar, is sick. So what does he do? He goes to visit, right? Bikur Holim, basic mitzvah, absolutely. God showed this when he visited Abraham after he was recovering from his Brit Milah. We know when somebody is sick, we go to visit. Yes, things have been a little different with COVID, where visiting was not always the smartest thing to do, but we found ways to still reach out, to call, to otherwise be connected. Great. So far, Rabbi Yochanan, you're doing great. So he gets to Rabbi Elazar's house, and as he comes in, he sees the room is dark. The room is dark. Now, there's no big windows. That wasn't always a great idea in the ancient world. It must have not have had any lamps burning at the moment. So Rabbi Yochanan needs to put a little light in the situation. So what does he do? He pulls up his sleeve. Now, you have to understand that when Rabbi Yochanan pulls up his sleeve, light pours forth. Rabbi Yochanan was considered to be the most beautiful man or woman person in the entire country. He was literally glowing with his radiance. And so Rabbi Yochanan pulls up his sleeve, and there is Rabbi Elazar in the room weeping. All right, he's weeping. It's not quite the illness that he was expecting, perhaps. But this is, I've always found, a beautiful way that the Talmud is telling us that not every illness is just of the guf, of the body. Sometimes there are illnesses of the spirit. And those too deserve bikur cholim, the visiting of those that are coming to help. So, nothing wrong. He doesn't turn and leave and say, oh, I thought you were sick, but you're just crying. He stays, of course. He does right. So far, he's got a very good average and some very shiny skin. And he says to Rabbi Elazar, why are you weeping? And that's where he goes off the rails. Right? He asks, why are you weeping? That's the perfect question. What's wrong? Why are you crying? But what does he do next? He keeps talking. Not the right choice. What should Rabbi Yochanan have done after he asked, why are you weeping? Wait for an answer. But how often do we rush in rather than waiting for an answer? How long is there that uncomfortable pause as the person seems incapable of articulating? They're fumbling with their handkerchief and they're having trouble getting it out. And you're starting to feel like maybe you're making things worse because you're asking them to talk. So I know what I'll do. I'll just give a couple options. Give me one nod for yes and a shake for no, and we'll figure out what's bothering you, Rabbi Elazar. And that's what Rabbi Yochanan does. He proceeds to list different reasons. He says, well, maybe if you are weeping because you don't think you've learned enough Torah, which, gee, thanks for telling me that I'm an idiot and haven't learned enough, and thinking that that might be so bad that you would catch me in a dark room crying, thanks. If you're worried that you haven't learned enough Torah, don't worry. Because we know that whether a person brings a small sacrifice or a big sacrifice, as long as their heart is directed towards heaven, then God approves of what they do. So even if you're a total idiot, it's okay because you try hard. It's the participation trophy of reassurances. Now, if that was the reason Rabbi Elazar was weeping, would you feel better? No. He's trying to commiserate. He is trying to blunt what he thinks might be the problem, the weeping over the not having learned enough in his lifetime. But instead, he is, in some ways, insulting, or at least insinuating that there would be reason, from his perspective, for Rabbi Elazar to weep over such a cause. And his solution to that is, well, you know, God just cares that you try, while true, is not going to necessarily pull a person out of the depression that has put them into this dark room. But apparently he doesn't receive a good answer, or no answer at all, so he goes on to, if, and another opportunity, if you are weeping because of your poverty, great, you think I'm poor and stupid, thanks, then don't worry, because you know not everybody merits to eat off of two tables, a euphemism for being able to eat from the table of Torah and to eat from a table of wealth. And you apparently don't get both. It's, you know, it happens. Not everybody can have both. Well, didn't you just tell me a second ago I also wasn't that great a Torah scholar? So doesn't that mean I have none? It's the fumbling for the second answer doesn't take into consideration what he had just tried to give as a first reassurance. And so the second answer is definitely going to fall flat, if that even was the reason Rabbi Elazar was weeping. So Rabbi Yochanan, sensing that he is not getting to the root of the problem and perhaps making it worse, goes on to play the trump card. If you are weeping for the children, meaning if you are weeping for those children of yours that have died, remembering that infant mortality, child mortality was very high in the ancient world, if that's what you're upset about, if that's why you're weeping, here is a sliver of bone from my 10th son that I have buried. You think you've got trouble? I've buried 10 sons already. Do you see me going around crying? Do you see me lying in a dark room? Now, this is where Rabbi Yochanan goes off the rails, and I'll just give you a little bit of a heads up. He's going to get what he deserves in just a second, in one of the funniest lines in the entire Talmud, but you have to look really squinting to see the humor. Rabbi Yochanan started to engage in what I like to call competitive victimhood. Oi, I heard the oi. Yeah, but my oi is bigger than your oi. Right? Competitive victimhood says, you think you have problems, my problems are greater. You think you should be sad because of the children you've lost, I've lost more kids. You think you should be sad because you are poor, I know people poorer. You think you're sad because of the situation you're in, I know, or I am in a worse situation. And the implication is your grief, your suffering, your sadness doesn't count for anything. It is inconsequential. It is unimportant. And in fact, I should be the one sitting in the dark room and you should be offering comfort to me. So let's just trade places, all right? Competitive victimhood has become a recurring theme in the modern world, and for a good reason. I mean, by good, I mean a morally inspiring reason, because we have learned over the last 100 years that those that are victimizers are bad, and that's been a long time coming for civilization to get to that place collectively, to realize that being an oppressor doesn't make you the strong guy that everyone should want to be like, but instead makes you kind of a jerk that no one wants to like. And so that means that in order to have status, you have to have the biggest grievance. Because you can't be the biggest aggriever anymore, which was the old way to get status. You punch other people, and that way you would be able to dominate them. Now you have to say, I have been punched by the most people, therefore you have to listen to my story, but I don't have to listen to yours. I get to dominate the narrative because my suffering is the only true suffering of any magnitude worth discussing. And your suffering, it's nothing. And that is kind of the way Rabbi Yochanan plays it. And I am not surprised when the Rabbi Elazar retorts, and again, one of my favorite lines in the entire Talmud, and I've got a lot of them, but this one is way up there near the top of the list. He says, no, that's not why I'm crying. I am crying because you will eventually lie in the dirt and rot with the worms. Your beauty, your radiance, remember Mr. Pull up the sleeve and light the room, you're eventually going to be dead and buried. And that breaks my heart. Now, Rabbi Elazar is playing a compliment to Rabbi Yochanan. He is saying, you're beautiful, but he's also saying, by the very fact of knowing your beauty, I am having an existential crisis here. I am lying in my dark room thinking, Rabbi Yochanan, I know this guy, he is beautiful and glorious, but you know what? His end is the same as everyone else's end. One day he is going to be worm food. One day his family will gather up the bones from his decayed corpse inside the tomb, gather them together and shovel them into a box, and he'll be sitting on a rack along with the bones of everyone else. That's his end. That's all of our ends. It is a deep, painful existential crisis, pointedly directed at the guy who was so clumsily trying to help him. And Rabbi Yochanan responds with great dignity and says, you know what? You're right, that is worth crying for. And they sit and they cry together for the mortality of all of us. And that is the transition point where we actually get progress in this story. When Rabbi Yochanan realizes that he should not be trying to explain away the grief that another person feels, that he should not be trying to erase it by saying it's not significant enough, and certainly should not be out-competing the other person for the grief. But instead to say, you know what, you're right. I'm going to die, you're going to die. If that's what you're sad about, you're right. That happens to all of us. We have a reason to cry. Not to descend forever into depression and believe that life is pointless. Judaism is far from being a nihilistic creed. But there are times where it does break our heart to realize that people and places and things will vanish from the face of the earth. We take reassurance and we take strength from the idea of the eternity that we truly have access to. But we also take moments to cry. And those moments are best when they are shared. And those moments are best when we do not deny the grief of another simply because we feel we have had more. And that's one of the big stumbling blocks for how we interact with other people. Imagine you're telling somebody about trouble you're having at work. I've got a boss, blah, blah, blah. I've got a coworker, blah, blah, blah. And the other person says, I know how you feel. My boss is even worse. One-upmanship, right? You know my neighbor, you won't believe what my neighbor did. Oh, you think your neighbor's bad? Wait, let me tell you about my neighbor. He did something even more insane. Or about a family member, or about some stranger you bumped into in the supermarket. And we get so close to sharing a shared experience of the absurdity of the world, of the incomprehensibility of people's petty behaviors. We're almost there to share. But we still want to win. We still want to be the one comforted rather than the one comforting. And that causes us to trip at the finish line. That causes us to say, yes, you're right, I'm going to hear what you're saying. And rather than simply saying, you know what, that's right, that sucks. That's terrible. Your neighbor is a jerk, your boss is incomprehensible. We should be getting your resume out there and, whatever. Instead of moving fully into sympathy mode, we decide we have to outdo them. Rabbi Yochanan didn't retort by saying, yeah, you're going to die too. He said, you're right. If that's what's making you cry, I'll cry with you. He learned his lesson by the end. We cry with others, just as we laugh with them. It's what that poem got so wrong. And by doing so, we strengthen each other. By doing so, we understand each other. And by doing so, it means the other person will be there when I need to cry. When I need to go and to complain to you about my neighbor, I've got good neighbors, but just imagine, if I need to go and complain to you about your neighbors, you will be much more receptive and willing to hear me and provide comfort and support if I didn't try to one-up you the last time you came to me with a problem. When I hear the problem that you have and I say, that's right and it needs fixing, even though in the back of my mind I say, that's not such a problem, my problems are much worse than that, but I keep that voice down and I don't let it out, then we actually maybe can get your problem solved and get you back on your feet. And then you'll be there for me when I do need to dump about my problems, which maybe objectively are worse. So much over the last few weeks as people have been following the catastrophe in the Ukraine, has heard people around the world complain, why does Ukraine get all this attention? What about Syria? Right? What about Tibet? What about all the places around the world that have had similar problems? Yes, and? No one is delegitimizing the fact that they also have problems, but right now Ukraine is the most in need of help and the most easy to help because of its proximity to those that are in a position to provide the support. It is not surprising then that it is getting a lot of attention. And if we are able to do something here, if we are able to keep supporting a country like Ukraine, enabling it to defend itself and withstand these attacks, then maybe it will be in a position to help others in due course as well. And maybe we will all be reminded that if we try to tackle problems like Syria, Tibet, and elsewhere in the world that have similar issues like Ukraine, that rather than trying to outcompete each other for being the sole object of the media's attention, we'll actually be able to compete on how well we can solve each of these problems in turn. We don't need to compete for grief. We compete for solutions. We don't need to compete for sympathy. We need to compete for having the ability to change the world. God did not ask us to simply lay down and mourn our own troubles. God told us to notice a friend in need and to go and help. There is a beautiful symmetry to the maftir that David read, the balance of how the waters that were used from the para aduma, the red heifer, were created. The waters are made, and the person using them purifies the person that has been touched by death. But in so doing so, they themselves become ritually impure. They also are now in need of purification. But that means that they need to be willing to extend themselves, to have somebody who is willing to shake and sprinkle that water on that person in need, without thinking of, well, wait, if I do that, then I'm also going to be in need. We can't have that. They take turns, and it works out. We can take turns in life in crying and laughing, supporting and needing support. This is the balance that God has asked us to look for, to achieve, to work on. Rabbis get it wrong. Individuals who aren't rabbis get it wrong. But together, we can get it right. Only together can we get it right. Shabbat Shalom.